In Mandarin, China translates to Middle Kingdom, zhong, the all-superior center of the world. And China is determined to reclaim its power, recentering itself at the heart of international order. From teachings in school to the narrative of the Chinese Communist Party, there is one message: you cannot trust the West. And if you do, you will suffer. China has forged this single narrative of suffering at the hands of Western powers and allies for decades, and this has a colossal impact on its worldview. Through this singular view, the CCP has been able to act with a tactical vengeance, transforming China's suffering and shame into revenge. The Western international order is its battleground, and power is at stake. Welcome to Living History. It all began in 1839. Over the next 110 years, China would suffer political, military, and cultural humiliations that would define its future. In its final era of imperial rule, China and Britain were significant trade partners, exchanging tea and textiles for silver. However, Britain began trading opium to redirect the return of silver back home, leading to widespread addiction across the country. The King Emperor banned the trade of opium, ordering imports to be destroyed while driving away British merchants. In retaliation, Britain sent navy ships up the Yangtze River, sparking the First Opium War. By 1842, China experienced the first of many humiliations at the hands of the West. Its defenses were embarrassingly demolished, and it was forced to surrender, relinquish control of ports along the river, and cede control of Hong Kong to the British. But this wasn't enough for the West, and in 1856, Britain, the US, and France launched another attack in the Second Opium War, exploiting even more port cities, such as Guangzhou and Tianjin. In 1860, new deals were imposed on China, and unrestricted access enabled the forced expansion of Western ideologies across the mainland, and subjected the country to Western demands and interests. China considers this period a time of unequal treaties, and millions of Chinese across the country also suffered ruthless atrocities and war crimes at the hands of foreign military powers. In further humiliation, China lost territory, control, and international standing. In 1860, Outer Manchuria was taken by Russia, and in 1887, Macau was leased to Portugal as a trading post. Japan gained control over Taiwan in 1895, and portions of Manchuria in the 1930s. Influenced by Western democratic practices, independence movements in Tibet, Mongolia, and Xinjiang reduced China's territory even more. This time in history is crucial in understanding how China now views the West: power-hungry, selfish, untrustworthy, violent. But it also explains how it acts. China doesn't trust the West, nor does it agree with its politics or supposed values. In their mind, Western aggression left behind a bloodied and battered landscape of broken people. Through these experiences, China vowed to eradicate imperialism forever and build military strength as defense against foreign aggression. It continues to maintain that its ever-growing military is a necessary shield against the West. It also uses Western strategies against itself, exploiting democratic weaknesses for its authoritarian gain. The CCP has been able to undermine and influence Western democracies, while simultaneously partnering with them economically. China has built economic power, expertly navigated diplomatic partnerships, and ultimately emerged resilient, all motivated by a nationalist fervor and memories of the past. This is now a war fought without weapons, but with influence. China feels it has first-hand understanding of Western greed. Thus, by binding the West into economic dependence through exports, investment, and trade, it now has the leverage to engage in diplomatic pressure, trade threats, media manipulation through propaganda, CCTV, CGTN, etc., university collaborations, and even political donations and influence. It is through pushing and repeating its historical narrative that the CCP has been able to consistently present China as an innocent and unfairly victimized nation that must rise and defend itself, return to its former glory. This has played a vital role in legitimizing China's actions, both to its own people and the international community, many of which are increasingly questionable. Recent exploits include human rights abuses, Xinjiang, oppression, stifling freedom of speech, protests being shut down, threats against Taiwan, the suppression of Hong Kong's autonomy, and, in some cases, the complete rewriting of any of its own wrongdoing, Tiananmen. Should the West raise an eyebrow to any of Beijing's military or political decisions, however, China doesn't just play the economy card. It also plays the "what about you" card, dubbing Western countries slave states that frequently launched wars to expand their territories, plunder wealth, and extend their sphere of influence. Of course, China is adopting its own strategies to extend its own sphere of influence, but Western countries are always painted in the light of hostility and threat, as overambitious and unpredictable war-starting governments that are built on weak democracies that can barely sustain themselves. China, on the other hand, according to its governmental literature, seeks peace, unity, and other romantic poetics, such as debt diplomacy, global connectivity, and win-win cooperation. It's all terribly clever, really. Everything the West does, China acts as if it is either an attack, an attempt at hostile conquest against their country, or something they can do in partnership, or better. Many of its geopolitical partnerships also manipulate and exploit the history of other countries who have been subjected to Western colonialism, while at the same time strengthening its position in the region. You see, the CCP acts through influence and interference, and has no shame about employing coercion, intimidation, and subversion to push its narrative and maintain control. After all, its era of shame is over. Instead, China sets examples of what happens if you speak out against its choices through high-profile individuals or organizations, instilling fear in business, politicians, and, of course, within their own country. But what does this mean globally? By continuously viewing the world through the lens of 100 years of subjugation and humiliation, China justifies remaining defensive, dissatisfied, and determined. Because of Western mistrust, China faces a range of options when it comes to rectifying and rebalancing the international order. First and foremost, the Western-dominated status quo can no longer be allowed to dictate what China does and how. Sovereignty must be upheld, and any Western interference is portrayed as merely an attempt to weaken a rising China once again. China's growing influence should be used not just to adapt to the pre-existing system, but also to offer itself as an alternative partner economically, geopolitically, and militarily. Ultimately, every choice China now makes is about far more than mistrust of the West. The CCP has been systematically and tactically pushing the boundaries of international order through a narrative of humiliation. This is not just a clash of ideologies and political structures. For China, the global opinion must change. Its values, political system, narrative, and history must be universally exported until Western ideas are no longer a threat and they are overcome. And it is using economics, trade, and a growing international influence as tools to ensure the successful export and normalization of its authoritarian system as the ultimate undertaking towards righting the wrongs of the past. For the CCP, it is time for the West to be intimidated, perhaps to the point of its own humiliation. Bygones will never be bygones, and the past will always be present. This is Living History, signing out.